Okay, so let me just summarize that what I have told yesterday. Um, so we have two types of sheets, three types of sheets in the data table. One is global and second one is local. Third one is a temporary, but we have not yet come to the temporary part. And also we discussed that, you know, uh, if you store data in the global sheet, the data can be accessed by all the actions. Also, if we store the data in multiple rows in the global sheet, then UFT will think that script should be executed for this many times. Each time is called as a iteration. Okay, so if you store if you store the data in two rows, then script will be executed for two iterations. All the executions, all the actions will be executed for two iterations. That's one. And we also discussed how we can do the setting change in case if you want to execute only for particular row, or if you want to execute for set of rows. Now you say here, like, okay, by default it will be executing for all the rows. In case if you want to execute for only a particular row, then what you do, go to file, setting, and then you say run, and then you can do the setting change here, right? Next. And another one is here, if you select this setting, if you select run one iteration only, then by default it will be executing only for first row. And if you want to execute for a particular row, again through the scripting, you have to use something called set current row. Set current row method is used to specify or change the focus to particular row based on where the focus has been changed. Then it will select that particular row here. Okay, right. So that's what that we have discussed till yesterday. Next. Okay, now if I run the script, which one will be executed? Second row will be executed. Just wait. Maybe internet is little slow. I don't know why. Yeah, now it would be fine. Let it get execute. So for which one it has been executed, you say test course 2. So it executed for second row, right? Why it's being executed for second row? Yeah. Now let's do this. How many rows that I have stored now? Maybe 5 or 6 rows that I have stored, and out of that you say test course 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so total how many I have stored here? So, okay, total 6 rows that I have stored. Out of that I'll say here 3, 5, 4, 1, 6, 3, something that I have stored here. Okay, so now what I want to do is, if I run the script, it will be executing for this because I've used set current of 2. But when I mean, see, I have stored 6 set of rows. Sometimes I might need to execute for all the rows. Sometimes I might need to execute for only one row, particular row, or sometimes I need to execute for range of rows. So in such cases, what I need to do is, if I want to now, I mean, we know that how we can execute for a particular row, right? So to execute for a particular row, then what you do, you say you go to the settings and then you select one iteration only. If you select the second option, it will execute for all 6 rows again. Now if I want to execute, I want to execute from third row to fifth row. I don't want to execute for all, I want to execute for range of rows, third row to fifth row. Then what you do, you select the third option, then you say 3 to 5 and apply, and then you run it. Test course 5, it has been executed now. Now you can see test course 5. It's taking only 5 again. You know why it is taking only 5? How many times it's executed? 3 times. But all 3 times what it has been taken? Second row only. Why it is? Because every time 3 times it will be executed. All 3 times what it will do? First it will say set current row of 2. So that means, okay, no matter wherever the cursor is, immediately it will be coming to the second row. Now I will comment out this. So what I do is, I'll just comment out this and then I will execute that. Now what it has taken? It has taken third row. Now again you can see that cursor has come to fourth row. Started from third row onwards now. So it has taken fourth row. Then it should be fifth row next. Okay. What happened? There are some problems. Now what happened here? It has taken from fifth row. Now how many times it has executed? 3 times. But from which row to which row it has taken now? Starting from third row to fifth row. So this is one of the interview question. How do you execute from particular row to? Assume that I have stored some 10 rows of data or some 20 rows of data in the data table, and I don't want to execute for all the rows. I want to execute only for fifth row to 10th row or sixth row to, I mean, they might give any number, their range of numbers. Then how do you execute from particular row to particular row? Then how do you do that? Then by using settings. So go to the file settings and then in the runtime, then you select the third option. Then you specify from this row to this row. If you want to execute only once, then you go to the first setting. I mean, select one iteration, select the option, run for one iteration only. Then for which iteration you need to run, use set current row. Or if you want to execute for all the rows, then you select the second option, run on all rows. Or if you want to select, if you want to run only for range of data sets, like second row to fifth row or third row to seventh row, something like that. If you want to execute for the range, then you need to select the third option. This is what that setting. But remember that that setting is applicable only for global sheet. That setting is not applicable for local sheet. Okay, so it will be considering the iterations only when you store the data in the global sheet, but when you store the data in the local sheet, it will not be considering the iterations. Okay, then but still if you store the data in the local sheet and still you want to execute for this many times, then what would you do? Then we'll see it, okay, further. Okay, now the another thing is here, one of the advantage with the data table is it helps for the parameterization, where if you store the data there in the data table, in case if you need to change the data, then you don't need to come to the script, you don't need to touch the script at all. You can directly go to the data table and then you can do the modification. But there is one of the drawback in the data table also. What is the drawback here? The drawback is, if you want to modify the data, if the data has been changed and if you want to modify the data, again you need to open the tool and you need to open the test and then you need to open the data table and then do the modification, because the data table is associated with the test directly, And if you want to modify the data in the data table, you must have to open the test. You have to open the test and then only will be able to modify the data in the data table. This is one of the drawback of the data table. Now consider like you have written only one script. Just as of now, you have written only one script. So there is no problem in modifying the data. You can just open the test and then you can do the modification. But assume now you have written 200 scripts. 200 scripts, nothing but 200 tests that you have created. So if you have created 200 tests and you need to run as a batch now. Batch means one by one that you need to execute. In such cases, what you have to do to run a batch, first you have to make sure that the data has been up to date. For all these 200 scripts, the data has been up to date. You have done all the required modifications to the data. Then in such cases, what you have to do, where you have stored the data in the data table, right? So to verify the data has been updated or not, or to update the data, you need to open the data table and then you need to do the modification. So this time what you have to do, you don't have single script now, you have got 200 scripts. So if you want to modify the data for 200 scripts, then what needs to be done? You need to open each script, open the first test, open the data table, and then you do the modification. And save the test. Once you don't save the data table directly. Once you save the test, data table will be automatically saved because the data table is part of the test. Now once the first test is done, then you open the second test and then again you do the modification and you save the test. Then open the third one, do the modification and save it. To open the data for 200 scripts, then what you need to do? You need to open 200 scripts one by one and then do the modification. So doing the modification is okay, but opening one by one test to 200 tests, we need to open one by one and do the modification. How much time that it will take? Lot of time, right? So just opening the test and doing the modification and closing it itself take a lot of time again. So that consumes a lot of time. This is one of the drawback of using the data table directly. One of the one of the reason why people won't prefer to use data table. So that's the reason most of the times, we normally prefer to use external sources. We will not use inbuilt data table. When you instead of using inbuilt data table now, if you use external data source, like maybe use an Xml file, Excel. If you use Excel, then through script it will be associated, but normally it will not be associated directly with the test, and Excel will be saved outside. So to open the Excel and to open that file, the data file, you don't need to open the test. Without opening the test, without opening the tool, what you can do? You can open the Excel, right? So now assume that you have got 200 scripts again. For 200 scripts, you might have created 200 sheets, and those 200 sheets might be there in the Excel. So now we can open that Excel. No need to open 200 scripts one by one. You just open that Excel, you navigate to each sheet, and then you can modify the data and you can save it. And then you can run the scripts. Saves time for you, right? Also, you don't need to know now if you want to modify the data in the data table, you should know minimum things about EFT at least. You have to install the EFT in the system, right? Sometimes what will be happening is, you might not execute the script. Maybe your client might execute the script, or maybe some manual tester might execute the script. So whoever wants to modify the data, just for modification also, you should have EFT installed in the system. If you are using data table, to modify the data also, you should have EFT installed. That consumes additional license again. Right? We don't use trial versions and all there in the reality, right? So if you want to open the EFT again, you should have an additional license for that. How many machines you need to install EFT? Wherever you want to modify the data, EFT is mandatory. That means there is a lot of dependency on the tool. Even to modify the data also, you have to depend on the tool there. I mean, that doesn't give the flexibility that, on reusability, that whatever you want. But if you use external source like, the Excel or XML or something, then you don't need to install EFT to modify the data. MS Office will be there in every system almost. Right. So if you have MS Office, you can just open the Excel and then you can modify the data and you can share that Excel with the people whoever wants to run the script. And they can just save they can copy that Excel file into their system and then they can run the script. Reduce the dependency on the tool. You should always look at how I can reduce the dependency on the tool. Right? If you're less dependent on the tool, then you get more flexibility. Always remember. I'm just explaining the reason why we look at the external sources always. Very important because tomorrow in case if you want to implement the automation from the beginning, this is what just exactly that you need to think. How much flexibility that you will be giving, not just for now. You have to think about the future. Whenever you are implementing the automation, you need to think about the future. Am I the person who is going to maintain this automation, or is there any other person who will be coming here and maintaining? Am I the person who is going to execute the script, or is the automation scripts going to be executed by the client side people or maybe somebody else? Okay, so if I'm the person who is going to execute, I'm the only one who is going to execute, then fine. Even though it doesn't have that much flexibility, then I can take a little bit of pain and then I can modify the data and then I can run the script because I'm the one that who is going to execute. But assume that okay, maybe some client side people are going to execute. Once I implement that, then I need to hand over them and they're going to maintain those and they're going to execute the script. Then if you say that every time you need to open the test and modify the data, and when it consumes that much time, client will directly say that okay, instead of opening the test and updating it manually itself, I can execute. Opening the test, modifying the data, saving it and closing it, taking a lot of time. Then within that time, then I manually can execute the test case. Then there is no point of doing the automation. Automation, the main intention of automation is two things. One is to make it faster and to reduce the efforts. But both are not happening here. I'm not able to save the time because execution taking faster, but updating the data and all taking a lot of time. Efforts and all, again, it is not saving the effort. Opening every test, saving it, closing it and all taking a lot of effort. What is the benefit that you're giving from the automation side? Right? So this is something that this is all these are thought process. Why we look at always the flexibility and external sources and all, it's just a thought process. You need to think. Okay, so this is the reason why we, even though the data table is one of the good feature given by the tool, but still we don't prefer to use it. But however, when you go to some of the, I mean, in the recent days, I mean nowadays the people always look at this kind of thoughts. But old days, when you look at, like when we started our career, like some 10 years back, 11 years back, testers were not good in programming. Testers were not good in scripting. Now at least everybody knows the scripting part, like how we can fetch the data from Excel, XMLs, all those. Because we are becoming expert in the scripting as well, because we have to be flexible enough ourselves to learn to work on other tools as well, so that we are concentrating more on the scripting as well, so that we are becoming expert on the scripting, so that we will be able to we are able to look at external sources. But when you look at old days, some 7-8 years back, we were not good in scripting part. People, the testers, were not good in scripting part. So again, I mean the scripting part. So if you use external sources like Excel, XMLs and all, you need to write a lot of scripting again to retrieve data and all from that, where we were not aware of that. We are not aware of. Most of the people, not only we, most of the people were not aware of that. So since we are not good in that much scripting, so that we were not going for external sources. We thought that if you use Excel again, like we have to write a lot of programming there, then people were not going. So that's the reason what they did. If you use inbuilt feature like this data table, then you don't need to write too much of scripting. Just some of the methods related to the data table, and then that to come you can get some help also. That's what that we were doing initially. We were using inbuilt data table, not the Excel. So in the beginning of the days, like when the frameworks were implemented some years back, then you can still see people were using data table. Most of the automation, like if you go to some big companies like JP Morgan or all those the old companies, the product based and all, service based in a sense, like we'll be changing the projects so that the new frameworks will be coming. But product based, many of the old companies have implemented the automation some years back. So 10 years back or 11 years back or 8 years back, like that, they have implemented the automation that time itself. So when they have implemented the automation that time, they were using data tables. And later on, okay, they continue like that, because later on, I mean, even though they become expert in the scripting, but changing that again, they have already used a lot of methods and they have implemented a lot of scripts and all. If they change the data source now, like instead of data table, if they go for Excel, everywhere wherever they are retrieving the data, like wherever they have used the method, every line they have to come and change. Again, if I move to Excel now, what will happen? Again, I have to change the data everywhere. I need to replace those methods and all. That consumes a lot of time again for us. It was a lot of efforts. Like product based means you will be having hundreds of scripts. So moving from data table to Excel or some other, then again I need to make the changes to all the scripts. So that's the reason people were not changing. They are using the same thing, data table. Okay. So that's the reason if you go to the companies, if you go to interviews for such kind of companies, then you can still expect people are using data table, even though that is not too flexible, but it has been implemented. It's a legacy. It's a traditional. Okay, so legacy in a sense the old technology, but there are legacy frameworks. Legacy in a sense like the frameworks have been implemented decade back. So people are still using, because of if they touch it and if they do the modification, then a lot of efforts needed again. So that's the reason they're continuing. So if you go for such kind of companies for interview, right, then you can still expect the questions on the data table because they're using it, right? So it's not about like sometimes when you are preparing for the interviews, when you are attending for interviews, it's not like that what you know. That's one of the bigger factor, what you know. Also, second one is what is expected, what they are following. Most of the questions will be coming up based on what they are following. Most of the questions following based on what they need currently, right? So what what they want. So that's the reason you still need, even though we don't use the data table in our framework, or the framework that what you are going to claim in the interview, say that okay, this is what that we followed, this is the approach that what we followed in our project. So in that approach you are not going to say that you have used data table, but still you should know those methods, you should become expert, because maybe some other companies might have followed that or might be following. You don't know for which company that you are going for interview, right? So you should not have any restriction. So since okay, we don't know what they are going to expect from us, then you should be expert in all. This is the reason why we are learning the data table. But even though we have the limitations, we have the drawbacks, but because many of the companies still following that, because it has been implemented long back. So normally what happened, they were using a data table. and they're continuing the data table methods. But one of the drawback, what I told you, to modify the data, then you have to open the test. You have to open the test, you do the modification, right? You know this. This is the drawback. But to overcome this drawback, we have got Excel files, XML Excel files. But again, what I am telling here, moving to the Excel file. If the script is you are not implemented it in the beginning itself, we can go to the Excel. But if the scripts have been already implemented, you have used data table methods everywhere in the scripts. But when you move to the Excel, you will not be able to use data table methods. Again, you have to go to Excel data application object and then you have to use them. Lot of modifications needed. But without doing any modifications to the script, with a small modification to the script, can I get that flexibility, like store the data in the Excel and retrieve the data from Excel to the script? But I don't want to modify my scripts. I need to modify, a little bit modification is required because I'm changing the approach a little bit now. I don't want to directly store in the data table. I want to store it in the Excel because updating the data table consuming a lot of time for me every time. But again, if I move to the Excel completely, updating the script consumes a lot of time again. Right? This is also drawback for me, and that is also required more efforts. But what is the solution? Both, I mean, I don't want to spend too much of efforts again, right? Because this is the concern raised by many companies earlier. So that's the reason what they have done is, okay, fine, we'll look at alternative now. Okay, we'll do one thing. You remain store the data in the Excel. Okay, now you store the data in the Excel. Don't store it in the data table. But let's do one thing. During runtime, what you can do, you can import the data from Excel to the data table. You can import the data from Excel to the data table. So in the beginning of the script, you import the data into the data table. So all the data will be remain coming into the data table from the Excel. So remaining scripts, if you have used data table methods, that will be okay now because the data is coming into the data table. Got what I am saying here? So what you do now, you store the data in the Excel, but do one thing. But what you do, you remove the data from the data table now. But during runtime, what you do, you import the data from Excel to the data table. So remaining lines, for remaining lines, data is coming into the data table only, so that your scripts will not be impacted much because data is coming into the data table. So data table methods, if you have used, there won't be any problem. There won't be any problem. So now you get the flexibility. Is the data is being stored in Xml Excel file, right? So that you can modify the data anytime. But during runtime, what will happen? The data should be coming into the data table. So store the data externally, but during runtime, that external data should come into the data table. That's a solution that we can provide. That's what the solution given by the HP also. So now the question is, how would I import the data from that Xml Excel file to data table? So what I'm doing now is, I'm just taking the data from here. What I'm doing, I'm storing the data in Excel. So first row would be the column headers in the data table because you cannot change the column headers. That remains ABC only. So that's the reason what they did. First row will be treated as a column headers. Now you say URL Next is master one. Did I give just username? Password. Then something wrong. Version first. Version second. The next is duration. Is this duration? Next is currency. Next is subunit. Next is cost. Then description. So what I'm doing now, I'm just storing the data in the Excel file. And if you want, you can make it to a tabular format or look better, that's it. Okay, otherwise you can keep like this. Now you store the data. Now I'm storing the data somewhere here. Now I got the data in Xml source. So what you do here, you delete everything from here. I deleted everything from the data table now. If I run the script, will it work? It will not work now. The reason because data is there in external source. But how my script can understand, how my tool can understand that I need to take the data from that Excel file to this data table. We need to import it, right? We need to import it. We need to explicitly tell to the script, say that, hey, do one thing. Before you run the remaining lines of code, first you import the data from that Excel to the data table. So that all the data will be coming into the data table, so that remaining lines I have used data table method, so that won't give any problem to. Modification is needed, but you are reducing the effort in the modifications. That's it. The question is now, how do you import the data from that external source to data table? Yeah, write down the methods. We have two methods to import the data from data table. Okay. The methods are like this. One is data table dot import. One is data table dot import. Second one is data table dot import sheet. Okay, what's the difference between these two? Any guess? She told something. Little louder. Okay. Okay. So the name itself suggests import sheet. Import sheet means import a particular sheet of the Excel into a particular sheet of the data table. Whereas import means it imports the whole file into the data table. Okay. So import method, data table dot import method imports the whole data file into the data table, whereas import sheet is used to import the particular sheet of the data table into, sorry, particular sheet of the Excel into a particular sheet of the data table. Okay. Now, see, in how many sheets that I have we have stored the data? Only in one sheet, right? So forget about import for a while. Okay, that's a different scenario that I create. Okay, so we'll go by scenario basis now. So I'll come back to the import again, but for us, what is needed? Import sheet. Okay. What is the file that we have created? Data create employee. Now, for import sheet, there are total 3 inputs required. Total 3 inputs required. One is the Excel file, from which Excel file you need to import. Second one is which sheet of the Excel file you need to import. Third one is into which sheet of the data table you need to import. File, source sheet, destination sheet. Okay. Now, one is file. Second one is source sheet name. In Excel, what is the sheet name? Sheet 1 only, right? Yeah, it's a sheet 1 only. It gives us sheet 1. Then you need to give the destination sheet. Destination sheet name, you have to give the name this time. Global. Excel file, source sheet name of the sheet in the Excel, name of the sheet in the data table. Which means that they import the sheet 1 into global sheet of the data table. That's it. Sorry? Yes. All 3 inputs are mandated. Okay. Now let's take this. How much data is there in the global sheet now? There is no data, right? Okay. Let me keep a breakpoint at this line and run the script. That line is not executed yet. No data. As soon as that has been executed, what happened? Look at the data table now. Data has come to the global sheet from that Excel. When I stop the execution, what happened? Data is gone. Remember, when you say data table that import or import sheet, that's a temporary importing. That means it will not come and store permanently. During the runtime only it imports. Once the execution is completed, whatever the data has been imported into the data table, that data will be gone again. Okay. So whatever the data comes into the data table, whatever things that you update during runtime, that will be only runtime. That means only during the execution. Once the execution is completed, the data will be gone. Okay. So this is something that important that you should remember. Now, if you say action 1 here, what does it mean? Action 1 is not there, right? Sorry. Login. Earlier, where the data was imported? Data was imported into global now. Into which sheet the data has come? Look at now. Which sheet has been selected? Right now, login sheet. So data is in the login sheet. Look at the global now. Global is empty. So if you give the login here, it will be importing into login sheet. If you give global, data will be importing into global sheet. And you see that the first row of the Excel is coming as column headers in the data table. First row of the Excel goes as a column headers in the data table. Okay, so next, one more thing that you need to remember is whenever you are importing the data into the data table, something that you should remember is it was working right. It was importing. I'm importing into global or local, anything that is will be okay. What happened? No change. I have not changed any method or anything. Look at that error. Somebody read out that error. What you said is right. Because it is already open. Right? Look at this. The data table that import sheet has been failed. Cannot open the XLS file because it is already open. Which means that this Excel file is already opened. And you close this, you retry. Now data has been imported. Remember one point, whenever you are using import, this is applicable for import or import sheet. For both, this is applicable. And whenever you want to import, you have to make sure that the Excel file that whatever you are importing, Excel file must have been closed. When the method import or import sheet is being executed, then the Excel file must be closed. If the Excel file is already opened, then it will not be able to import it. So the precondition to import the data from Excel file is the Excel should have been closed. Also, you must have to provide the absolute path. Okay. So remember, when I say absolute path, it has to be till end of the file. I mean extension. You have to give the file extension. The whole path you need to provide. Okay. So one of the drawback with the data table is if you want to modify the data table, you'll have to open the test and then only you will be able to do the modification. But how would you overcome that drawback is they have given additional approach here. So you can still store the data in Xml Excel file and you can import the data from Xml Excel file to local system. Sorry, into the data table. Okay. Right. So this is related to why I explained this. This is related to another interview question. We have learned VB script. We have learned how to read the data from Excel file. Question is now how many ways you can read the data from Excel file? One of the common interview question this is. In how many ways? One is you have Excel dot application object, create object of Excel dot application. Second one is we have, Excel can be treated as a database object. Then we have something called ADODB, okay, which some people will learn little later. So Excel can be treated as a database object. Then you can connect it to the Excel as like you connect it to the database. You can run the queries and then you can retrieve the data. Second way, that's called ADODB, two ways. And the third way is you can import the data from Excel to the data table and then you can retrieve the data. So you have total three ways. In case if this question has been asked in interview how many ways that you can retrieve the data from data table, then you say that if they ask about pure VB script, two ways, but if they ask any UFT, then three ways. One is Excel.application, second one is by using ADODB, and third one is by importing the data from Excel to the data table and use the data table methods. Okay. Yeah. So total 3 ways. By using ADODB object, by using Excel.application object, by importing the data from Excel to data table. Okay, so there are total 3 ways. A very important interview question this is, which you should not fail. Okay, fine. So I'll stop this. Okay, so sorry for starting little late today.